And so for us as designers, when we're challenged with complex problems, you know, the number of individual design decisions we end up having to worry about goes up very, very, very quickly. And so it's no surprise that when we go from a simple object like this to a complex thing like a service, that we often get it wrong. And we can't anticipate everything. And that's okay, except the problem is I think most of us as designers are trained to think that we can anticipate everything, and we approach the problem as though that we can anticipate everything. And that only makes the negative outcomes worse, in my opinion. So what I think it means is that, it means a kind of a shift, a paradigm shift, if you will. And the best way I've got of sort of illustrating that is I think it means a shift from thinking about the world in the way that this guy encouraged us to think about the world. Now, you all should know who he is, right? This is Isaac Newton. Which is this assumption that we have an ability to predict the world based on actions in the present. And when we think this way, it encourages us to be top-down, to be predictive, to believe we can imagine a complete system, and yet, as I've tried to describe, too often we can't. And I think complexity requires us to think more like this guy, Charles Darwin. Because he encourages us to think about things like constant evolution, bottom-up and emergent change, things never being finished, and the notion of unpredictability at the large scale, even if we understand things at the small scale. So I'm kind of encouraged by the idea that as designers we need to start emulating Charles Darwin a little bit more and stop emulating Sir Isaac Newton. Not that they're not both still very important historical figures, of course, but I think we might think differently about the way we design. So I sort of, well, what might some of the principles of a more Darwinian approach, a more evolutionary-based or biologically-based approach to design, what might they be? What might be some of the things that we might think about? Now, these are sort of suggestions. This is not a very sort of tight thesis at this point, so you may disagree with some of these or may well be able to think of better principles than I have, but this is my starting list anyway. This is one of them. It's a very simple one. This notion that we should give up on the idea of designing objects and think about designing behaviors. Behaviors are inherently complex, but they're about the interrelationship between us as people and the objects that exist in the world around us. Of course, many of the things that we're designing today are actually nested behaviors, complex systems. But I think, so it's one trying to illustrate the difference between designing an object and designing a behavior. So this is an object. It's actually a label or a notice that you will see on trains in Europe. And it's a vain attempt to encourage the male of the species to create less mess in the toilets. It doesn't do anything to actually change the behavior. It's simply, it's an instruction. Right? It doesn't work very well. Any of you who've been into a toilet on a train in Europe will know very well it doesn't work very well. And now about 25 years ago, the guy who managed the airport in Amsterdam, the international airport in Amsterdam at Schiphol, had another idea, a much better idea. And this was his idea. Now, about half the audience, well, depending on our sort of split here, will know what this is. The other half will have no idea, no clue what I'm talking about. So the guys in the room know very well what this is. So this is well, you all know it's a fly. But this fly, what he realized was if he printed this fly on the urinal in just the right spot, you give the guy something to aim at. And when you give him something to aim at, he actually does a remarkably good job of aiming at it, and it reduces the mess in urinals by up to 80%. This is designing a behavior. This is a piece of design that actually changes the behavior of people and does it in a rather successful way. It's a very simple notion of the design of behavior, although I think it's done a lot for the world. I think it's actually created, and we could do with doing much more, many more things like this, I think. Anyhow, so design behaviors, not objects.